Hi, welcome to the Pursuit of Truth. So 2 stories to cover on this one. The first is about the Israel-Hamas situation, with the ICC now looking into whether they're going to issue arrest warrant for, I believe it's 3 Hamas leaders and Benjamin Netanyahu as the foreign minister. I'm not sure exactly, which is a bit of a turn up for the books. This is, of course, due to, I believe, the case put by South Africa, who have been the only country in the world to stand up and say that we're going to recognise what's going on in Gaza and actually do something about it, whereas most countries have just been having endless debates. And of course they put their neck on the line by standing up, because they're like a whistleblower, isn't it? I'm sure that the West and America are probably not best pleased, but they should be best pleased, because they should be best pleased by the courage shown by South Africa to stand up for what's right, and maybe because of their history they know. But yeah, it's interesting how Joe Biden and the West now are sort of coming down on the ICC, which is probably set up by the West. And when it's, Slobodan Milosevic, it's, yeah, that's right, well done ICC. If it was President Putin, and I'm surprised that that he hasn't had an arrest warrant. Maybe he has and I haven't heard it. But I suspect if that had been the case, they would have said, well done ICC. But when it's one of their own, their friends, it's suddenly no. Like Joe Biden's come out and said this is terrible, and obviously Benjamin Netanyahu has said it's an outrage as well. So it's like you set up a system that's meant to be independent and take facts and look at things and say, this is the outcome. And when you don't like the outcome, or the outcome is about someone that's quote unquote friendly with you, then suddenly you're able to say, oh, that's outrageous. I mean, it just smacks of Orwellian bureaucracy, and it's just, this is what's wrong with the world, is that humans are able to favour things irrespective of the truth or facts, whether you like it or not. If it's been independently done and it's accurate, then you should just have to accept it, even if it is your friend, even if it's your family member, because it's the truth, isn't it? If they've done something wrong, broken the law or whatever. But I don't know, maybe this is, politically minded. I don't know about the ICC, I don't know their background. Obviously we know there is issues in the world with racism and anti-Semitism and things like that, and misogyny, and those things could sway people's minds. I don't know. But assuming the ICC have actually done a thorough investigation, of course we've all seen on our TVs, unlike any other conflict, the devastation, even more than the Ukraine conflict. We've seen the suffering, whether the numbers, we don't know how accurate they are, but we've seen a lot of suffering going on, and we've seen from their own mouths the siege, i.e. the no electricity, no water, no food. We all saw that, and everyone knew that moment they said that showed a different side that we've never seen before. If people were going to do it before, they probably didn't do it openly as much, and that showed like a different mentality to this, because there is collective punishment. That is seeing like the whole of the people as one thing, because turning off electricity, gas and water affected everyone. It didn't just affect Hamas. It wasn't targeted or surgical. We all saw the hospital, Al-Shifa doesn't look targeted or whatever, but it'd be interesting to know what happens, because I don't think, strangely, Israel signed up to the ICC, so I don't know whether their arrest warrant will mean anything. It's going to put a lot of pressure on the West and America especially, to whether if that arrest warrant is issued, what they'll do about it. But of course, counter that, of course, Hamas, they've got 3 arrest warrants. I expect they're not situated in Palestine. They're probably sitting comfortably in Qatar. It's funny how the people of Palestine probably some of them will support Hamas, and yet, just as like with us in the war, when Churchill sitting in his bunker, or Hitler in his bunker, all these world leaders, they get you to fight their wars. that you probably got no real energy for, other than the patriotism that you've been brainwashed into. But anyway, yeah. So I thought that was interesting. That's the first one, and then of course the blood scandal. The reports come out, and lo and behold, what the people have been saying for all these years has turned out to be accurate. The government were protracted and slow, or aren't they always? I waited 50 years to make a decision on this and write a report, and only because Theresa May was in 2017 brought it up to her credit. And they've all been vindicated. Rishi Sunak has given his most grovelling apology, although I wonder if Keir Starmer did as well, because this happened over 50, 60 years. I suspect there were Labour and Conservative governments during this time, and during the actual blood scandal, who oversaw these things, and so they're both equally as responsible. But I suspect, as usual, no one will face trial. No one will be put in prison, for making the actual decisions, because there's a lot of paperwork that shows that they had knowledge, the people who did it had knowledge of what they were doing, and therefore the government and NHS bosses must have also had knowledge of what was going on, because I assume they had read that paperwork. But I suspect no one's going to get any time for it. These kinds of crimes, people seem to get away with. Right, so these two bits.
Alistair Bunkle reports.
The charge sheet against Benjamin Netanyahu and his Defence Minister Yoav Gallant is scathing. To be accused of war crimes alongside some of Hamas's senior leaders is deeply humiliating for the two Israeli politicians. As well as Netanyahu and Gallant, the chief prosecutor is seeking arrest warrants for Hamas's leader in Gaza, Yahya Sinwar, its military chief Mohammed Daif, and political head Ismail Haniyeh. All 5 men are accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity.
International law and the laws of armed conflict apply to everyone. No foot soldier, no commander,
the ICC.
No civilian leader, no one can act with impunity. Nothing on earth can justify willfully depriving human beings, including women and children, babies, the old and the young, of the basic necessities required for life.
The charges mostly relate to the October the 7th terror attacks by Hamas and the Israeli response since. There is also reference, though, to illegal Israeli settlements in the West Bank. The charges against the Israeli leaders also reference the humanitarian crisis inside Gaza and accuse Israel of deliberately withholding aid. Benjamin Netanyahu hit back at the charges.
The prosecutor's absurd charges against me and Israel's defense minister are merely an attempt to deny Israel the basic right of self-defense. And I assure you of one thing, this attempt will utterly fail.
A panel of judges at the ICC will now consider the request before deciding whether arrest warrants can be issued.
My guess is that these judges will have been presented with the evidence in an easily digestible form, and they will make their decisions pretty rapidly. I would think weeks, not months.
It's unclear how this might affect the war. Israeli forces have been pushing deeper into Rafah today and fighting in the north of Gaza. Netanyahu has vowed to keep fighting until Hamas is destroyed. He might choose to double down in defiance of the court. But he'll know that events today could put him in a small group that includes Vladimir Putin and Slobodan Milosevic. And that is a label that would remain with him for life.
Oh, he does have an arrest warrant.
Alistair Bunkle, Sky News in Jerusalem.
Iran has declared 5 days of national mourning after its president, Ibrahim Raisi, died in a helicopter crash. He'd been traveling in a helicopter through bad weather in the northwest of the country. They were traveling back from a visit in Iran's East Azerbaijan province, crossing mountainous terrain in heavy fog.
We'll soon find out whether that was anything dodgy went
Journey
on.
to a greener future.
Let's go to this then. This might have the blood and the Israel thing. didn't know Putin already had an arrest warrant. That shows how ineffective the ICC is, that they can issue it, and then, well, it's up to the person to come out of the country before they can even arrest them. Oh dear.
Morning. The Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, apologised for 40 years of failure and cover-up over the infected blood scandal. He promised to pay whatever it takes to compensate the victims, and today we'll find out how. Sir Brian Langstaff's inquiry concluded that patients were experimented on by doctors and not told of the risks, sometimes for years. And infected patients were cruelly told that they received the best treatment. Successive governments, the NHS and the medical profession were found to have repeatedly used inaccurate, misleading and defensive lines about the scandal. And there were downright deception from officials from the Department of Health, with some documents deliberately destroyed and others going missing. Sir Brian Langstaff concluded that the failures of governments compounded the suffering of victims. Amelia Harper has more.
A round of applause from some as they heard of the inquiry's findings. But for others, the pain of the failings laid bare was too great. A small yellow teddy clutched for comfort. Victims told the scandal was no accident. Now Rishi Sunak says sorry.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the Civil Service, to ministers and successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. I want to make a wholehearted and unequivocal apology for this terrible injustice.
The Prime Minister says he'll pay comprehensive compensation as set out in this Green Book, the full details of which will be released in the coming hours. So far, 4,000 survivors have received interim payouts of £100,000, including some of the victims who attended Trelaw School in Hampshire, where children with haemophilia who received treatment alongside their education were included in secret trials to test blood products. Richard Warwick, unknowingly infected with HIV and hepatitis C, expects others too to be paid.
That lands entirely in the hands of the government. They now take the next step as to setting up a proper compensation scheme. September this year is being talked about. Hopefully things will get sorted out by the end of the year.
And speed is also expected by the parents of 7-year-old Colin, his memory now printed across their hearts after he died, having also been infected with HIV and hepatitis C during treatment for haemophilia.
I think we all deserve a little break, and I think that's what Colin would want anyway.
I think there's something else for a change, but no, my main concern is get it done while these lads are still alive, give them some peace.
But after a more than 40-year wait, many aren't. Justice denied, while relatives are left to keep their memory alive. But those that are still here stand united. Their message of struggle held high for so long will finally be addressed. Amelia Harper, Sky News.
And we're going to be hearing from the Work and Pension Secretary, Mel Stride, in just a few moments' time. Meantime, the US President Joe Biden says Israeli forces are not committing genocide in Gaza. Speaking at a Jewish American event at the White House, he denounced the International Criminal Court's chief prosecutor for requesting arrest warrants for the Israeli Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, and his defense chief. The prosecutor is also pursuing Hamas leaders for alleged war crimes.
We reject the ICC's application for arrest warrants against Israeli leaders. Whatever these warrants may imply, there is no equivalence between Israel and Hamas. And it's clear Israel wants to do all it can to ensure civilian protection. But let me be clear. Contrary to allegations against Israel made by the International Court of Justice, what's happening is not genocide. We reject that. We're going to always stand with Israel and the threats against its security.
News correspondent Alistair Bunkle joining us live from Jerusalem. Neither Israel or the US, of course, are signatories to the ICC. What happens next?
Well, what happened yesterday was that the chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, a British man incidentally, requested arrest warrants for those 5 individuals, including Benjamin Netanyahu and Yahya Sinwar. What happens next is that will go to a panel of judges in the International Criminal Court, and they will make a decision whether or not there is sufficient evidence and grounds on which to then issue those arrest warrants for one or all of them. How long that will take, we don't know. Sometimes it can take months, but international courts are acutely aware that they have been accused in the past of acting quite slowly, and so I think they will want to not face that accusation on this occasion. They will also be acutely aware of the urgency, given that the war in Gaza is ongoing. So I think they will want to make a decision within weeks, not within months. We'll see what that decision is. If it is that they agree with the chief prosecutor and that arrest warrants should be issued, well, that will make life very difficult indeed, particularly for the 2 Israeli men, Yoav Gallant and Benjamin Netanyahu, because you would expect it will severely restrict their travel to any country that is a signatory of the International Criminal Court. America isn't, Israel isn't, the UK is, most European countries are, and also will countries that are signatories like the UK be able to do business with an Israeli government whose leaders have these arrest warrants hanging over them? Whether you agree with them or not, it'll be a very difficult moment as well for the White House and for Western capitals to decide, do they try and stick by their ally, Israel, or do they have to side with the rules of an international court?
Okay, for now, thank you. Obviously monitoring that story with interest.
I don't know, it's like, isn't it? It's like, I don't know, it's like, I'm shocked that America is not part of the International Court of Justice. What a shocker. Well, I suppose really they couldn't be because of their... no wonder Nixon got on, or successive presidents got away with Vietnam, and Bush got away with Iraq and Afghanistan, both senior and, but more notably junior. I guess because of their many conflicts that they seem to be involved in, proxy or otherwise, would make it very difficult for them to be part of that. But that is shocking, though, that something so major that they're not part of it. I think that speaks volumes, and probably why they're not accepting it. But I think they would always say that. They're always going to stand by Israel no matter what, like Biden said. He said that in his own words. But I don't know how you square off the fact that if you consider the ICC, I mean, if you've seen what they did with Putin and Slobodan Milosevic was correct, are you saying that they were wrong now with, you know, you didn't say they were wrong with the Gaza people, and I don't know, no one's making equivalence. You know, there doesn't need to be equivalence to be able to say that this person's guilty and this person's guilty. You know, it's like in a court. You may have a murderer that gets 25 years and a rapist that gets 15 or 20 or even gets 25 years as well. We're not talking about equivalence, they just happen to be the same, you know, they commit different crimes, and yet they should be punished for those crimes. But, yeah, I don't know. I don't know, to be honest, but I don't think they would likely come up with this judgment unless there is some kind of anti-Semitism or racism or etc. that goes on these things, which is of course possible because they're human beings after all, and human beings have these things. So it could be some kind of agenda, I don't know. But then again, we have seen what's been going on, and I don't think anyone could say that what we've seen for what's happened in Gaza, I mean, whether it's genocide or not, that's a very difficult term to prove, or attempt to genocide, because most people don't actually complete it. But the siege thing does put a big question mark over that, because that showed a different kind of mentality. But I think there's many cases where it shows that there were definitely war crimes committed. I don't think anyone can argue with that. And that doesn't mean that, you know, you're supporting Hamas or whatever. They committed war crimes as well, and they've kept these hostages, and they've, you know, whatever they're doing to them and done to it on October the 7th and afterwards. You don't have to, you know, remove the tags. These are human beings, and there's been human beings who belong to different tags that have done terrible things, and they're not the only terrible people. You know, these things have been going on in wars and have probably been unseen in lots of conflicts. It's just this conflict during the mobile age has caught the attention of TV cameras, and you know, the images have got out. These things have probably been happening in all the conflicts. We just didn't know about it. But as usual, like with the blood scandal and COVID inquiries and all these other inquiries, the Primrose inquiries and International Committee Court of Justice, everything is protracted, everything is slow when it comes to these things. And then at the end of the day, you can then decide whether you want to follow it or not. This makes a mockery of humanity, really. Anyway, take care, take it easy, God bless, and peace. Okay, let's see what the UK response to ICJ is.
Happening as far as the ICC is concerned, the International Criminal Court issuing an arrest warrant for, amongst others, the leader of Hamas and also Benjamin Netanyahu. The US are outraged in the form of the president, but we've heard from Labour, and they are suggesting that it is the right course of action.
Well, we believe that it's deeply unhelpful, because what we should be focusing on is getting humanitarian aid into Gaza. We've done a huge amount of work there in terms of working with the Americans, for example, on the temporary port leading into Gaza, pressing the Israelis around keeping those crossings open, such as areas using ports like Ashdod to get humanitarian aid in, pressing for a humanitarian ceasefire so we can start to get hostages out and start to move the whole situation into a more positive place. With the ICC, of course, we as a government don't recognise the state of Palestine. The Israelis are not members of the ICC, so I think there are issues around jurisdiction. But I think the bigger point is the one that I'm making as to where the focus really needs to be, particularly now, which is around getting that aid into Gaza and moving into a more positive place. And that's why the Foreign Secretary is out in the Middle East again. It's his 11th trip out there, Gay, since he became Foreign Secretary, because we are deeply engaged and pushing and trying very hard to move towards the humanitarian ceasefire that we need in order to start to ease what is a terrible situation in Gaza.
To go back to my question, if the ICC does issue an arrest warrant for Benjamin Netanyahu and the leaders of Hamas, do you think he should be arrested?
Well, I think with respect, I have answered it, because what I've said is I think that the whole situation is unhelpful and is not where the focus should be.
Just to be clear.
So, well, these are situations that unfold through time. At this particular moment in time, the view that the government has is that this is unhelpful. There are issues around the jurisdiction of the ICC that I've just set out, and
but we're signatories to the ICC, aren't we?
Yes, indeed, but we don't recognise the state of Palestine, and they are one of the parties to this. So there are jurisdictional issues around the judgment itself. But I think that's
the weight behind the ICC.
Well, all countries must. It's not for us to dictate what the French should do, but our position is very clear on this. But where we really need to have the focus now, as I say, is you have a very...
I don't want to say the word I was going to say, but this is exactly the same with all these scandals. They're kind of like, oh, let's look away from it and look at this and concentrate on the aid that you haven't been able to do in months, rather than look at this. And we're signed up to it, but yeah, they're not signed up to it, so let's just let it go. If someone's committed war crimes, shouldn't that be the main factor of this, irrespective of anything else? But of course not. They haven't signed it, so no, we don't have to worry about it then. Oh, let's just wait for it to happen. Let's concentrate on this. It never changes.